History is filled with great commanders, but few conquered the known world before the age of 30. This legendary Macedonian king built an empire of blood by mastering the brutal reality of ancient combat. Here are the 7 ruthless tactics that made Alexander the Great unstoppable. The first ruthless tactic Alexander perfected was a battlefield maneuver so devastating that it completely shattered the massive armies of the Persian Empire. This tactic was known as the hammer and anvil, and it relied on a brutal combination of heavy infantry and elite cavalry. The anvil was the legendary Macedonian phalanx, a massive block of soldiers armed with 18-foot-long pikes called sarissas. These men were not meant to kill the enemy quickly, but rather to pin them in place and absorb their attacks like a giant impenetrable wall of sharp wood and bronze. Once the enemy infantry was fully engaged and trapped against this deadly wall, Alexander would unleash the hammer. He personally led his elite companion cavalry in a sweeping, high-speed flanking maneuver around the sides of the distracted enemy line. The cavalry would then smash directly into the unprotected rear of the enemy formation. Caught between the crushing weight of charging horses and the terrifying wall of pikes, the opposing soldiers had absolutely nowhere to run. They were systematically slaughtered in a giant meat grinder, unable to defend themselves from the dual assault. This ruthless combination of holding and flanking turned the battlefield into a trap of certain death. The second method he used was the Decapitation Strike, a tactic designed to ignore the bulk of an enemy army and end battles almost instantly. Alexander understood that ancient armies were often held together solely by the presence and authority of their king or commanding general. If that leader could be killed or forced to run away in panic, the morale of the entire army would collapse entirely. At massive conflicts, like the Battle of Issus and the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander found himself severely outnumbered by hundreds of thousands of Persian troops. To win, he formed his best cavalry into a tight, wedge-shaped formation and charged directly at the Persian king Darius III. Alexander completely ignored the vast majority of the enemy forces, cutting a bloody path straight through the royal guards to reach the commander. This terrifying, suicidal charge was incredibly dangerous, but it completely broke the nerve of the Persian king. When Darius saw Alexander cutting down his personal bodyguards and charging right at him, he turned his chariot and fled the battlefield. Just as Alexander predicted, seeing their king run away caused the massive Persian army to immediately scatter in fear. For his third ruthless tactic, Alexander used extreme military engineering to guarantee total annihilation when a city refused to surrender. The most famous example of this ruthless determination was the brutal siege of Tyre in 332 BC. Tyre was a heavily fortified island city located half a mile off the coast, and its people believed they were completely safe from Alexander because he had no navy to attack them. Instead of giving up and marching away, Alexander simply ordered his men to build a massive land bridge through the deep ocean water. For 7 grueling months, his soldiers threw rocks, timber, and dirt into the sea while taking heavy fire from enemy ships and archers. He literally changed the geography of the earth just to reach the people who had defied him. Once the giant causeway finally reached the island walls, Alexander rolled massive siege towers across the new land and smashed the city open. To punish them for making him wait and work so hard, he slaughtered thousands of defending soldiers and sold 30,000 civilians into slavery. This terrifying display showed the world that hiding behind water or stone would only delay their inevitable destruction. The fourth tactic on our list shows how Alexander mastered the dark art of psychological warfare by making a horrifying example of anyone who dared to rebel. When his father died, several Greek city-states thought the young, newly crowned king would be weak, and the powerful city of Thebes decided to rise up in armed rebellion. Alexander knew that if he showed any mercy, other cities across Greece would instantly join the revolt and destroy his kingdom from the inside. He marched his army to Thebes at lightning speed, smashed through their defensive walls, and unleashed a level of violence that shocked the ancient world. His soldiers massacred over 6,000 Theban warriors in the streets, showing absolutely no pity to those who tried to surrender. But the bloodshed was not enough for Alexander, so he ordered his men to burn the entire city to the ground, leaving nothing but ashes and rubble where a great civilization once stood. He then took the 30,000 surviving men, women, and children and sold every single one of them into brutal slavery. By completely erasing Thebes from the map, he struck deep fear into the hearts of every other Greek city, ensuring that no one else would ever dare to challenge his authority. As his fifth ruthless tactic, Alexander used a strategy of relentless pursuit to completely break his enemies after the battle was already won. In ancient warfare, most generals would stop to celebrate and loot the enemy camp after winning a major battle. But Alexander believed that a wounded army was still a dangerous army. He refused to let defeated survivors rest, regroup, or fight another day. After the Battle of Gaugamela, the Persian army was shattered, but their king and several key generals managed to escape into the mountains. Instead of enjoying his massive victory and resting his exhausted men, Alexander immediately ordered his cavalry to mount up and chase the fleeing survivors. He drove his soldiers forward at a punishing pace, riding through the blazing heat of the day and the freezing darkness of the night for hundreds of miles. They rode so hard and so fast that many of his own horses literally dropped dead from total exhaustion. This ruthless, never-ending chase completely shattered what was left of the Persian command structure. Because Alexander never stopped hunting them, the enemy soldiers could not gather supplies, form new defensive lines, or organize any kind of resistance. The sixth brutal tactic was the Feigned Retreat, a highly dangerous psychological trick that required perfect timing and absolute discipline. Alexander knew that attacking a well-organized enemy formation head-on was a great way to lose thousands of men in a senseless bloodbath. Instead, he would order a portion of his elite troops to charge forward, engage the enemy briefly, and then suddenly turn around and run away in apparent panic. In the chaos and adrenaline of combat, the enemy soldiers would see the mighty Macedonians fleeing and assume they had won the battle. Eager to slaughter the retreating men, the opposing troops would break their strict defensive formations and chase wildly after Alexander's soldiers. This reckless pursuit created massive unprotected gaps in the enemy battle line. The moment those gaps appeared, Alexander would spring his deadly trap. His retreating men would suddenly stop, turn around, and lock their shields, while Alexander led his heavy cavalry straight into the newly opened holes in the enemy line. By tricking his enemies into abandoning their discipline, he turned their own confidence into a fatal weakness, slicing their divided army into pieces and destroying them from the inside out. The seventh and final ruthless tactic was the forced march of terror, where Alexander subjected his own men to environments that everyone else considered completely impassable. He understood that the best way to catch an enemy off guard was to attack from a direction that seemed physically impossible to travel. Whether it was the freezing, snow-covered peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains or the scorching, waterless sands of the Gedrosian Desert, Alexander forced his army to march through hell on earth. He drove his soldiers to the absolute brink of starvation and dehydration, caring only about the speed of their advance. During these brutal marches, thousands of his own men and camp followers died from exposure, disease, and exhaustion. But Alexander never slowed down his brutal pace. Because he was willing to sacrifice his own soldiers to the harsh environment, he was able to bypass heavy enemy fortifications and appear deep behind enemy lines without warning. When opposing kings suddenly saw the Macedonian armies standing at their gates weeks before they were expected, their morale instantly shattered. This ruthless willingness to suffer extreme losses to the elements made Alexander a completely unpredictable and unstoppable force of nature. Which of these brutal military strategies do you think was the most effective on the ancient battlefield? Leave your answer in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to the channel.